Richard, in our world, we face NIMBYism, the not in my backyard syndrome. And so even when people understand the historical patterns of racism in housing, they may still not want us there. So how do we change the hearts and minds of people to be accepting so that we can provide equitable housing opportunities?
Well, we are changing hearts and minds now. As I say, what we need to go beyond that is civil rights groups that will include people in these communities. There are many well-meaning people in these communities. They're not a majority, but there are many well-meaning people in these communities who would be happy to join a civil rights group if it was organized for them. I gave a talk a few months ago when I was still traveling before the pandemic to Kansas City, to a large group, 300 people in Kansas City. And I was on a panel with the mayor of Kansas City, and he was talking about how they only build affordable housing in low-income neighborhoods in Kansas City. And I said, why don't you build it in high-opportunity neighborhoods? He said, well, the people wouldn't support it. He said, we don't have a majority on the city council. So I said, well, if you wanted to abolish single-family zoning in Kansas City, how many votes would you have on the city council? And he said 4, maybe 5. And so I said, how many votes are there on the city council? He said, well, there are 13. So I said, you only need 2 more. Are there 2 districts in Kansas City that you might be able to press with a good civil rights movement to reconsider its opposition to single-family housing? And so he said, yeah. He said, maybe District 4 and District 6. So then I turned to the audience. This was mostly a white audience. It was mixed, but mostly a white audience. I said, how many of you live in District 4 or District 6? And about 45 people raised their hands from this. I said, well, that's the beginnings of a civil rights movement to put pressure on those 2 city council people to change their views about abolishing single-family zoning. That can be done everywhere. So it takes moving from understanding to action. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's the key next step we need to take.
So Richard, we have a question from someone about emerging real estate developers and how can they combat prices while also attempting to develop good, affordable properties?
Well, in many communities, it's not possible, as I said, for the private sector to develop housing that's affordable to working class families, to lower middle class families, to the majority of African Americans who are priced out of high opportunity communities. That can't be done without subsidies. We only subsidize the lowest income families at this point. Most of our low income housing tax credit developments are for people with 30% of the average median income in a community. We need to subsidize housing in many, many places, especially communities that are either suburban or urban and gentrifying, for people who have 100% of the average median income, but who can't afford housing because the private sector can't build it. This is not something that can be solved without new legislation, and that new legislation will only come about from the translation of this new awakening we have about segregation into direct action to demand those kinds of programs.